I was mocked by my wife's family at my father's funeral until the will was announced. 0130. The funeral humiliation. They laughed at me. At my own father's funeral, while his body lay in that mahogany casket, my wife's family stood in the back row whispering, snickering, treating me like I was the help. Her brother called me a charity case. Her mother said I looked cheap in my suit, the same suit I'd worn to my wedding 5 years earlier. My father, Michael Patterson, the man who taught me what it meant to work with your hands, to honor your word, to stand tall even when the world pushed you down, was being laid to rest. And all they could do was mock me. Jennifer's father leaned over to her uncle and said loud enough for me to hear, "At least this won't take long." Man probably left him a rusted toolbox and some debt. They actually laughed. At a funeral, my father's funeral. But then, the lawyer walked in. He carried a leather briefcase, worn at the edges, and inside was a manila envelope sealed with red wax. The room went quiet, and when he began to read what my father had written, when those words left his lips, I watched every single one of them freeze. Their smiles died. Their whispers stopped. Because what my father left behind wasn't just money. It was the truth. 133. The questions. So what was in that will? Why did my wife's family hate me so much that they'd turn a funeral into a stage for their cruelty? And why, after everything, did my father make sure they'd all be standing in that room when the truth came out? See, this isn't just about inheritance. It's about what people reveal when they think you're worth nothing. It's about the lies families tell themselves to justify their contempt. And it's about a man, my father, who spent his final years watching, documenting, and planning something none of them saw coming. Because here's the thing. My wife's family didn't just think I was poor. They thought my father was too. They thought we were both beneath them. And that assumption, that arrogance, that's what made what happened next so devastating for them. Why would a family turn on their own? What did my father know that nobody else did? And why did Jennifer's family act like they already knew what was in that will, like they'd already divided up what little they thought he had? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3:10 Backstory and Character Setup. My name is David Patterson. I grew up in a small town outside Toledo, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. My father worked at a machine shop for 30 years, came home every night with grease under his nails and pride in his chest. He never made a lot of money, but we never went without. He taught me how to fix a carburetor, how to frame a wall, how to shake a man's hand and mean it. When I met Jennifer, I thought I'd found someone who valued the same things. She was beautiful, smart, finishing her master's degree in marketing. We met at a coffee shop where I was doing contract work on the electrical wiring. She said she liked that I wasn't afraid to work hard. Her family, though, they were different. Her father, Richard, owned a regional insurance firm. Her mother, Patricia, spent her days at the country club. Her brother, Andrew, worked in finance and never let me forget it. From the first family dinner, I felt it. The way they looked at me. The way Patricia asked what my career plans were, as if being an electrician wasn't a real career. The way Richard barely shook my hand. They tolerated me because Jennifer loved me, but they never respected me. And when my father got sick, when the cancer diagnosis came, that's when things got worse. My father had always been private about money. He drove the same Ford truck for 20 years. He lived in the same house he'd bought in 1983. He never talked about investments or savings or retirement funds. To the outside world, and especially to Jennifer's family, he looked like a man who'd worked hard and had little to show for it. Patricia said it to Jennifer once, thinking I wasn't listening. Your husband is going to be stuck taking care of a dying man who can't even afford his own medical bills. I hope you're prepared for that. Jennifer didn't defend me. She just looked down at her wine glass. That hurt more than anything, her mother said. My father spent his last year in and out of hospitals. I took time off work, stayed with him during chemo, held his hand when he was too weak to speak. Jennifer's family made comments. Andrew said I was probably hoping for an inheritance. Patricia said I should focus on my own future, not waste time on someone who wouldn't be around much longer. They didn't understand. My father wasn't a burden. He was my hero. And in those final months, I noticed something. Late at night, when the nurses thought he was sleeping, my father would pull out a notebook. He'd write in it, slowly, carefully, his hand shaking from the medication. When I asked him about it, he just smiled. Making sure things are in order, son. Making sure you're taken care of. I didn't think much of it then. I figured he was writing down bills, organizing paperwork, trying to make things easier for me after he was gone. I had no idea he was writing something else entirely. Something that would change everything. 3 weeks before he passed, he called his lawyer, a man named Gerald Hoffman, someone I'd never heard of. They met privately. My father handed him a sealed envelope and gave very specific instructions. "Read this at my funeral," he said. "Make sure they're all there." I didn't know who they were, not yet. 10:20. The funeral confrontation. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were turning, the air was cold, and I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. He looked at me, squeezed my fingers weakly, and whispered, "You were always enough, David. Don't let them tell you different." Those were his last words. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. I paid for everything out of my own savings. A modest service at Riverside Chapel, a simple casket, a small reception afterward. I didn't ask Jennifer's family for help. I didn't want their money or their pity. But they came anyway, all of them. Patricia, Richard, Andrew, Jennifer's Aunt Carol, her Uncle Tom. They arrived early, dressed in black, whispering among themselves before the service even started. I was standing near the casket, trying to hold myself together, when I heard Patricia's voice behind me. "Is this the best casket you could afford, David? It looks a little plain." I turned around, stunned. "Excuse me?" She smiled. That thin, polite smile people use when they're being cruel. "I just mean, your father deserved something nicer. But I understand. Not everyone has the means." Richard chuckled. "At least, it's over quick. No drawn-out estate nonsense. I'm sure he didn't have much to leave behind anyway." Andrew chimed in. "Probably some old tools and a mortgage he couldn't pay off. Hope you're not expecting a windfall, David." I clenched my fists. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw them out. But this was my father's funeral. I wasn't going to disrespect him by causing a scene. Jennifer stood beside me, silent. She didn't defend me. She didn't tell her family to stop. She just stared at the floor. The service was brief. A pastor said a few words. Some of my father's old co-workers attended and shared memories. Jennifer's family sat in the back, checking their phones, barely paying attention. And then, just as we were about to close the casket, Gerald Hoffman walked in. He was an older man, maybe 70, wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He approached me, shook my hand, and said, "I'm sorry for your loss, David. Your father was a good man." I nodded, confused. "Thank you. But I don't think we've met. I was your father's attorney. He asked me to be here today. There's something he wanted me to read." The room went quiet. Jennifer's family perked up, suddenly interested. Gerald opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Patricia whispered to Richard, "Did you know about this?" Richard shook his head, frowning. Andrew leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Gerald cleared his throat. "Your father left very specific instructions. He wanted this read aloud, in front of everyone, immediately following the service." Patricia scoffed. "This is highly unusual. Can't this wait?" Gerald looked at her, his expression cold. "No, ma'am, it cannot. He broke the seal and began to read. And that's when everything changed. 2035 to 0 aftermath and investigation. Before Gerald read the will, before the words that would shatter Jennifer's family were spoken aloud, I need to tell you what I didn't know, what none of us knew, because my father wasn't who they thought he was. He wasn't just a machinist who lived paycheck to paycheck. He was something much more careful, much more deliberate, and he'd spent decades preparing for this exact moment. After the funeral, after everything that happened, I went back to my father's house. It was a small ranch-style home on the east side of town, with a gravel driveway and a detached garage he'd built himself. I'd been there 1,000 times, but that day it felt different, like I was seeing it for the first time. I started going through his things. Old bills, tax documents, receipts stuffed in drawers. And that's when I found the first clue. A property deed. But not for the house I was standing in. This was for land. 120 acres in rural Montana, purchased in 1985 for $12,000. I stared at the paper, confused. Montana? My father had never mentioned Montana. I'd never heard him talk about owning land, investing, anything like that. I kept digging. More documents. Stock certificates from a small tech company called Apex Systems, purchased in 1998. At the time, they would have been worth almost nothing. They'd been acquired by a larger firm in 2019. Those shares, if he'd held on to them, would now be worth millions. I sat down on the floor of his office, surrounded by papers, trying to make sense of it. My father, the man who drove a 20-year-old truck and wore the same work boots until they fell apart, had been quietly building wealth for decades. And he'd never told anyone. Not me. Not Jennifer. No one. Why? I called Gerald Hoffman. I need to understand something. Did my father ever talk to you about why he kept all this secret? Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father was a proud man, David. He didn't want people to treat him differently. And he wanted to see who would stand by you when they thought you had nothing. He was testing them, all of them." That hit me like a punch to the chest. He was testing them. My wife's family had failed spectacularly. But there was more. I found a small journal in the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside were notes, dates, quotes. My father had been documenting everything Jennifer's family said about me. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment they treated me like I was beneath them. He'd written it all down. December 2019, Patricia said David would never amount to anything. April 2021. Richard referred to him as a charity case at Easter dinner. September 2023, Andrew told Jennifer she could do better. He'd been watching, listening, protecting me in the only way he knew how, by making sure the truth would come out when it mattered most. I went to my father's garage, the place where he'd spent countless hours working on projects, fixing things, building things. And that's when I found the safe. It was hidden behind a pegboard covered in tools, built into the wall. I'd walked past it 1,000 times and never noticed. There was a keyhole. I remembered the key I'd found taped under his dresser a week earlier. A small brass key I'd assumed was for a lockbox or a filing cabinet. I tried it. The safe opened. Inside were more documents. Titles, deeds, account statements, and a letter addressed to me. I opened it with shaking hands. "David, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all this while I was alive. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I needed to see how they treated you. I needed to know if the people around you loved you for who you are or for what they thought you'd inherit. Your wife's family failed that test, every single one of them. They looked at you and saw someone small, someone less than. They looked at me and saw a poor man who couldn't provide. They were wrong. About both of us. Everything I built for you. The land, the investments, the savings. It's all yours. And when they hear this, when they realize what they've lost by treating you the way they did, I want you to stand tall. You are my son. You are worth more than they will ever understand. Love, Dad. I sat in that garage and cried. 35-0, 45-0, the revelation. Back at the funeral, Gerald Hoffman stood in front of everyone. The sealed envelope, now open in his hands. Jennifer's family sat forward, eager, assuming this would be quick, assuming there was nothing to inherit, assuming they could go home and continue their lives without interruption. Gerald began. The last will and testament of Michael David Patterson. Written on September 14, 2024. Witnessed and notarized. He paused, looking directly at me. To my son, David Michael Patterson, I leave the entirety of my estate. Patricia's head snapped up. Richard's eyes narrowed. Andrew's mouth fell open. Gerald continued. This includes the property located at 447 Riverside Lane, Toledo, Ohio. This includes 120 acres of land in Flathead County, Montana, currently valued at approximately $2.3 million. This includes all stock holdings in Apex Systems Incorporated, currently valued at $4.7 million. This includes all savings, bonds, and financial accounts, totaling an additional $1.2 million. The room was silent. You could hear people breathing. Jennifer looked at me, her face pale. Her family looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Gerald wasn't finished. Furthermore, I leave my son the knowledge that he was the only person who stood by me when I had nothing to give. The only person who visited me in the hospital. The only person who cared whether I lived or died. To everyone else in this room who believed I was poor, who mocked my son, who treated him as if he were beneath you, I leave you this message. You were wrong. About him, about me, about what matters in this life. Patricia stood up, her face red. This is outrageous. Michael was senile. He didn't know what he was doing. Gerald's expression didn't change. Mrs. Calloway, your father-in-law was of sound mind when he drafted this will. I have medical records and witness testimony to confirm it. Any attempt to contest this will result in immediate legal action. Richard stood next to his wife. This can't be right. Michael lived like he had nothing. He drove a truck from the 90s. He wore the same clothes for years. There's no way he had millions. Gerald smiled, just slightly. Your mistake, Mr. Calloway, was assuming that how a man lives reflects what he's worth. Michael Patterson was frugal because he was smart. He invested wisely. He saved carefully. And he watched as you and your family judged his son for not being wealthy. All while sitting on more wealth than any of you will ever see. Andrew stood up, furious. This is garbage. He manipulated a dying man. He tricked him into writing this. I finally spoke. My voice was steady, calm. I didn't know any of this, Andrew. I found out the same time you did. The difference is, I was there. I took care of him. I loved him. You didn't. Jennifer reached for my hand. I pulled away. Gerald held up another envelope. There is one more thing. Michael left a second letter. He instructed me to read it only if anyone contested the will or accused David of manipulation. The room went still. Gerald opened it. To anyone listening who doubts my son's character, know this. I documented everything, every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment you treated him like he was nothing. I have recordings. I have notes. I have dates and witnesses. If you contest this will, I will make sure the world knows exactly what kind of people you are. Patricia sat down heavily. Richard stared at the floor. Andrew stormed out. Jennifer started crying. 45-0. 55-0. The final twist. A week after the funeral, I met with Gerald again. There's something else your father wanted you to have. He didn't include it in the will because he wanted you to find it privately. Inside, the folder was a mortgage document. For my house, the house Jennifer and I lived in. I'd been making payments on it for 5 years. Or so I thought. Gerald explained. Your father paid off your mortgage 3 years ago. He made arrangements with the bank to continue sending you statements so you'd keep making payments into a separate account he set up in your name. Every payment you thought you were making to the bank, you were actually making to yourself. That account now has over $70,000 in it. I couldn't speak. He wanted you to learn discipline, to feel like you were working for something. But he also wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, you'd be secure. You own your home, free and clear. David. You have been for years. I broke down. Not because of the money, because of what it meant. My father had been protecting me, guiding me, setting me up for success, all while letting me believe I was struggling. He gave me dignity. He gave me pride. And he made sure that when the people who looked down on me realized what he'd done, they'd have no choice but to see me differently. But here's the thing. I didn't need them to see me differently. I already knew who I was. My father made sure of that. Gerald handed me one last document. Your father also left instructions for Jennifer. My heart sank. What kind of instructions? He left her nothing in the will, but he left her a letter. I opened it. Jennifer, if you're reading this, it means you're still with my son. I hope that's true. I hope you chose him over your family. I hope you stood by him when they mocked him. If you did, then this letter is a reminder that love is not about wealth. It's about loyalty. But if you didn't, if you stayed silent while they tore him down, then this letter is a warning. You married a good man. Don't lose him because your family couldn't see his worth. Sincerely, Michael. I folded the letter and looked at Gerald. Did she stand by me? He shook his head. That's for you to decide. That night, I went home. Jennifer was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me. David, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them. I sat down across from her. Why didn't you? She didn't have an answer. Not a good one. We separated 2 months later. Not because of the money, because I finally realized that my father was right. The people who matter will stand by you when you have nothing. Everyone else is just waiting for the reading of the will. 55-0, 60-0, closing. So, what do we inherit from our parents? Is it money? Property? Investments? Or is it something deeper? My father left me millions of dollars. But what he really left me was a lesson. That my worth isn't determined by what I own. It's determined by how I treat people. By whether I show up. By whether I stand tall when the world tries to push me down. Jennifer's family never apologized. They never reached out. They simply disappeared from my life, humiliated and angry that a man they considered beneath them had outsmarted them all. And me? I'm still an electrician. I still drive a modest truck. I still live in the same house. Because my father didn't raise me to show off. He raised me to be solid, to be real, to be enough. And I am. So here's my question for you. What would you have done? If you were in my position, would you forgive Jennifer? Would you cut off her family forever? Would you use the money to prove them wrong? Or would you just walk away? I read every comment. Let me know what you think. And if you found this story powerful, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real-life stories that will make you think, make you feel, because the next story I'm telling, about the family who burned down their own house to hide a secret, is even more shocking than this one. Thanks for watching. And remember, you're always enough.